Good morning, evening, afternoon, night, whatever time of day it is for you. Um, I had a serious question because this just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. I've watched a lot of anime and read a lot of manga, and there's just one thing that is irritating the living hell out of me. And it's gotten to the point where I'll stop reading and or watching whatever it is that does this thing that just makes no sense to me. I mean, it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense all at the same time. It's very confusing. Um, but I can't figure it out. Something about it is it's just how to it's just why. Um, so I was reading um, what was it called? I forget the name of it already. It is called. I I I can't find it. My mind's gone blank. Anyway, I was after reading this story, I started watching my isekai life. I gained a second character class and Black Summoner with a bunch of others that I just started watching that looked interesting to me. Um, Also went back and rewatched Overlord for like the millionth time because it is awesome. And Skeletal Knight in Another World, which is surprisingly very good. I'm quite upset that it was just the one season because it was such a good show that it seriously needs another season. Um, I don't know why it suddenly came to my attention as I was watching these and reading the mangas that I was reading. And let me know if anyone knows the reason why this is or has also noticed this little tidbit in these types of shows. Um, but why is the church always corrupt? There was one that I was reading where the saintess is literally locked in the church. She is not allowed to leave the church. Um, and it's not because she was an actual saintess, it was because the church wanted to use, excuse me, um, the power that the name brought. The actual saintess they drove out and tried to kill. There was another one. Um, I can't remember the name of it either. I am terrible with names. Anyway, the church has two girls. One is the actual saintess, and the other one has the power to charm people, basically. So everyone automatically assumed that the girl with the charming power was the saintess. Um, when the church realized that she wasn't, they decided to kidnap the other girl from her family, lock her in the dungeon, and basically use these magical chains that would transfer her power to the non saintess girl. Um, and they were basically barely keeping her alive. And the girl with the charming power, I believe her name was Marilyn or something along those lines, goes and starts taking these little cups of acid down to where the Saintess is and would throw it on her and then leave. Basically, torturing her slowly, wanting her to die. Because if she dies while the chains are on her, she believes that the saint's power will go to her. Not true, but the church then jumps on board with this little girl saying, "Why do we have to keep it alive? It is so hideous," and blah, blah, blah. As long as the chains are on it, couldn't we just kill it and all the power would come to me? And the priests, the high priests, and all this got it in their minds that that would actually happen. Um, well, the saint ends up being saved by someone who is breaking into the church to get evidence on the church for something. Um, because him and his vassals did not believe that their saintess was actually the saint. Um, so he breaks in, um, and he just sees this girl chained up in the dungeon, barely dressed, and then he hears footsteps and talking, so he quickly hides behind one of the gigantic pillars in the room. And he sees the so-called saintess come in with a little tiny cup filled with some sort of liquid and throws it on the girl, who no longer screams from pain anymore, and it starts eating away at her skin. And then it heals right up because the saintess's power keeps her healthy. It's supposed to keep her from dying, it's supposed to keep her from aging, but he noticed that the church and all the priests and all the servants of the church were all joining in on this. They would all come in at random times throwing acid on this girl and then leave without a trace. So he started following the fake saintess around, trying to figure out what their gameplay was, and he overheard a conversation that they were just going to kill her and take her power. Him knowing that that's not how that works, and if the saintess dies, the demon lord wins, he decided to save her. Um, which was funny because he turned out to be the demon lord himself before the transformation happens. Um, the demon lord comes in this story. The demon lord comes to be when something tragic happens to the saintess and she breaks. Once she breaks, the demon lord is born, and it's not technically being born, but someone who was a heavy believer in the saintess basically breaks at the same time and transforms into the demon lord. Basically gains all this power to avenge the saintess. Um, so he rescues the saintess from this dungeon from the church and takes her back to his mansion, and she finds out uh, through a self-induced coma, still uh, can still hear everything around her and stuff like that, but she basically put herself into a coma because she just didn't want to deal with anything anymore. Um, she found out that the guy who rescued her happens to be um, what was his name? The young Duke of, I can't remember the last name. It ends up being the Duke's son, first son, who rescues her, and he basically goes and sees her every day, tells her what's going on in the world, how the church has now hidden away the saintess, um, and will no longer let people see her. Uh, how people are starting to believe that the church does not actually have the saintess, how the imperial family is now pissed at the church, um, for letting one little girl slip through their fingers. Yes, the imperial family was in on it. They always are. Um, and she starts getting curious as to why the Duke's family isn't a part of it, why um, the imperial family and the church didn't go to the Duke first, considering that he was obviously a threat to the imperial palace. Why they didn't assume that he might have something to do with it. But then she overhears some of the servants talking as they were cleaning her room that the Duke has more power than the imperial family, so they couldn't just barge in and do whatever they wanted because the Duke not only has all the money, all the people's support, he also has all the knights and all that. So he's got all this great power to where he could take over the imperial family, but for some reason he refuses to do so. I'm not entirely sure why they always refuse, and at the same time, I'm like, good, because then they'd barely get to spend any time with their family. But more than half of these dukes don't really care for their families in the first place. From what I've noticed from all of these freaking stupid nobles and stuff like that, it's always the same. They never care for their children. It's always a nanny taking care of them. Unless, of course, it's an evil little bastard, and then, of course, everyone loves them and pretends like they're the actual family. I've read another story like that that really pissed me off. It still pisses me off. Which is another story of a corrupt church. Anyway, um, I've noticed this a lot in all sorts of stories. The church is always behind evil. And I don't know if it's just one corrupt person that's slowly corrupting the others around them, or if the church actually believes that they're doing something right. It I've noticed it everywhere. And I literally mean everywhere. I've seen it everywhere. And it's just like, really? Like why are all the priests and the saints, so-called saints, why are they so corrupt? What what's going on? There was one story where the church wasn't corrupt, and that was because our main character was the leader of the church. Now there were a few corrupt people in his church, obviously, but he wasn't going to do anything about the corrupt people in the holy nation until he had actual proof. Um, they called him a king, I believe, the king of the holy nation. Um, and he's kind of a lazy type person, which is really funny because then he comes across this little girl after going to rescue the prince, and everyone believes that this little girl is his daughter, which I have absolutely no idea. But they never really finished that story, and I haven't seen any updates for it lately. But basically, this little girl went back in time and was basically reliving the same thing over again, and she decided she wasn't going to do it. So, on her way to um, whoever's adopting her, I can't remember his name, uh, the disgusting bastard is what I'll call him. Um, on the way to his place where he's going to lock her up eventually, um, she just jumps out of the carriage when it stops unexpectedly because of traffic. And she runs into the prince, and who's ever knights, I believe he was a count. I believe he was a count. I'm not entirely sure. It's been a while since I've read the story because they haven't updated it. Um, so she jumps out of the carriage, runs into the prince who's undercover. Apparently, no one recognizes the prince because the count's knights end up threatening him and try to kill him just to get the little girl back. Which then the king of the holy nation intervenes and saves them both, and is wondering. And both of them are wondering why the count wants this little girl so much. So they start looking into origins and stuff like that. Um, and that her magic power, um, that she has divine power just like the the king of the holy nation. So everyone assumes that she's his daughter. He assumes that it was his dad's last fling before he passed, since she was just about the right age for it. I can't remember, I believe 8 or 10 years old, somewhere around there. Um, so yeah, uh, all this. Um, I remember that she got sent to the count's place anyway, eventually, um, due to the emperor's orders or something along those lines. And he ends up really missing her and wants to stop by and see if she's still doing okay. When they pass by the count's residence, they see that a small building further into the woods where she's locked up, a little cottage is on fire. Sorry, my headphones were twisting up on me. I hate it when you do that. Um, the count that I'm talking about has this odd obsession with her, and it started with her mother. He was completely in love with the child's mother, an obsessive point. Okay. Um, that he was so pissed when he found out that she married whoever and had a child. Um, when he heard that whoever, I'm guessing it was his like his his brother or cousin, something along those lines, had a child with this girl. He then um, basically hides the fact the child was born, and um, the nanny who was supposed to be taking care of her ran off with her to protect her because the Duke wasn't there at the time that the baby was born. Um, and most of the knights were gone. So the nanny ran off with this child, um, threw her in an orphanage, and then passed away. Um, it took the count some time to find her, and then he adopts her. Um, funny thing is that he didn't technically adopt her, so technically it's not his daughter, but technically speaking, that's his damn niece. Now, this is where things get disgusting. Okay. Um, in her past life, she was locked up in that tiny cottage till she was about 16, where he came to the cottage and became more, as she aged and was getting older and wanted to experience more things, he would start changing the way he treated her. At first, it was, I just want you to be safe. He would never lay a hand on her. He could tell her stories. He would give her anything she ever wanted. Um, and she lived in the mansion with them. Well, one day she tries running away because she's getting picked on by her stepsister, and his wife. So basically, her aunt and her cousin. So she decides that she's going to run away. She doesn't want to be near them. Well, the count hears of this, gets pissed at both of his wife and his daughter, and screams at them, and then slaps them, and then goes to get the little girl back and locks her in the cabin. You'll be safe here. He occasionally come and visit her, occasionally. Then he started not seeing her for a long period of time. She managed to escape again. He hears of it. He goes and gets her back, locks her back into the cabin, and seals all exits and windows and stuff like that, making it extremely difficult for her to get out. Um, she hit, I believe, when she turned 13, that's when he started physically abusing her. Um, he would beat her while saying things like, "I can't believe you want to leave me. I'm doing all of this for you," and blah blah blah. Normal psychopath shit. Obsessive. Anyway, um, and his daughter and his wife were now extremely jealous of the little girl who was getting all this attention. The wife got to the point where she just stopped feeling anything at all. She no longer cared for her own daughter, no longer cared for him, no longer cared for keeping up appearances with the public. She just kind of just shut down entirely and locked herself in her room. The daughter, on the other hand, had her father's obsessive personality and wanted daddy's attention all to herself and was pissed off that another little girl was getting all of daddy's attention. So she goes to the cabin one day while dad's not there and attempts to burn it down with her inside of it. Um, the little girl inside the cabin was just like, so be it. Um, if I have another life, I'm not going to live like this anymore. I'm going to get away from these people because I want to live. And she kind of knew where this was going to end up if she continued staying there with nothing happening. But she wasn't strong enough to fight back. There was going to be nothing she could do. Um, so she ends up dying in that fire, goes back in time to the point where the Count had just adopted her, and he asks her if she remembers her father and her mother. She doesn't answer. Um, and she waits for the perfect opportunity to jump out of the carriage and all this. Um, but again, that was like the only one that the Holy Nation wasn't, the church wasn't corrupt about, the only one. There were several of them where the church isn't exactly corrupt, but more often than not, you'll find that it is. But it was just something I was curious about, so I wondered if anyone else had noticed any of this. Especially if you read a lot of isekais or um, reincarnations, transmigrations, whatever. Um, that if you noticed how corrupt the church is, because I when the second I saw these two, it all of the shows that I had watched came flooding back, and it was like, how did I not notice this before? Why are all the churches and the priests so corrupt? And it was driving me nuts. So I was just wondering if anyone else noticed. Anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and get off of here because I've got some things to do. So I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your morning, evening, afternoon, night, whatever time of day it is for you. And hopefully, I'll be able to get back on here more often. I've just been out of it lately. So, see you guys later. Please be safe out there.